heart of where innovation, money, and power collide in Silicon Valley and beyond. This is Bloomberg Technology with Caroline Hyde and Ed Ludlow.
Live from New York and San Francisco, this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, we'll have full coverage on the aftermath of the attack on former President Donald Trump. That's as the RNC kicks off in Milwaukee.
And we'll turn our attention to M&A as Google eyes Wiz for its biggest ever acquisition.
Plus, we bring you the latest on Apple as shares hit a record high. But first, we check in on the markets and a record high across the board. The S&P 500, its 38th record being hit today. And what leads us higher from a points perspective is the magnificent seven, the Nvidias, the Teslas, the Apples of the world. We'll dig into those names throughout the show. But notably, this is a Trump trade. This is the aftermath of an assassination attempt that potentially means Trump is more likely to win the White House. And we see that reflected in Bitcoin as well, Ed. We're seeing up more than 5%. In fact, we're seeing biggest moves in 2 months of crypto as he is seen as much more pro-crypto candidate to lead the White House. But Ed, what are you watching on the micro?
Well, we're going to talk a lot about the Trump trade throughout the hour, but the direct Trump trade for many is Trump Technology and Media Group, ticker DJT, the parent company of Truth Social. The social platform of choice for former President Trump. The events of the last 48 hours are driving the stock higher. We're up 35% now. We have been as high as 50%. And since listing earlier this year, it's a stock or a SPAC delisting that's had a lot of volatility as the market kind of says, what odds are we pricing in the outcome of the presidential election, be it Trump or Biden? Now that we're moving towards a place where a Trump presidency seems more likely, you get that kind of reaction. But I know we're going to dig into that much later in the hour, but in more detail. Yeah,
and for now, look, let's go on the ground to Milwaukee, where former President Trump, we understand, has arrived for the Republican National Convention. Joining us now, Bloomberg's Kayleigh Lyons. A lot of breaking news to continue to digest, Kayleigh.
Yeah, there is, of course, the utmost being what happened over the weekend at his rally in Pennsylvania, in which the president was shot, former president, in the right ear. Obviously, an assassination attempt that he survived, but very much changes the tenor of what is going down in Milwaukee this week. There is incredibly intense security. Donald Trump himself admitted that he was considering postponing his trip here, but did indeed come early, in fact, yesterday afternoon, and is preparing, we understand, according to an interview he just gave to Fox News, to announce his vice presidential pick today. But of course, the news does not stop there. We learned just this morning that the judge in the criminal case brought against him in Florida, the documents case, a judge appointed by him, Eileen Cannon, has now completely dismissed that case against him on the grounds that the appointment of special counsel Jack Smith, who of course brought that case, was unconstitutional, essentially went around Congress, is what the judge has ruled here. Obviously, there is room for an appeal. The Justice Department is probably likely to do so, but that's just another piece of news that works in the former president's favor as the proceedings at the convention here get underway in Milwaukee.
Later in the program, Kayleigh, we're going to discuss some of the big names from the technology world who have either come out and endorsed President Trump following the events of the weekend or weighed in, frankly, over what happened. The other story, of course, is the response from President Biden. What is that playing out like in the news cycle where you are?
Well, the president clearly is still trying to keep himself in the news cycle, Ed. We have heard from him addressing cameras 3 times since that shooting on Saturday. He, of course, first made remarks from Delaware the same day that it happened. He gave brief remarks to the press in the early hours, Sunday, rather, and then, of course, gave that Oval Office address at prime time, 8 p.m. Eastern last night, basically calling for unity, calling on Americans to turn down the temperature, tone down some of the rhetoric in the aftermath of what he said is something that shouldn't be taking place in America, political violence. He said that there is no place for it in this country, even as he was giving that speech, not just as a president, but a presidential candidate who was running against the very man who, of course, was shot at a rally on Saturday during the usual course of the Democratic process. So we're likely to see a tone shift, too, from the Biden campaign, who have pulled down their advertisements in the aftermath of this assassination attempt. They're probably going to be retooling their messaging. And Donald Trump, we understand, is as well. He, of course, will be addressing the convention on Thursday evening. In an interview to the Washington Examiner after the shooting, he said he is reworking that speech. He said it was going to be a humdinger, and now he's going to use it as an opportunity to call for national unity.
Bloomberg's Kaylee Lyons in Milwaukee. Thank you. Meanwhile, we want to hone in now on social media and disinformation online following the attack on President Trump. We heard earlier today from former National Security Advisor to the US, John Bolton, on the attack, but also on how conspiracy theories will remain in its wake.
We need to do the review of this in a calm way. I think do it quickly as well, because there are already conspiracy theories about what happened on Saturday that I think are Looney Tunes, but I don't think they're going to go away until we have an independent, objective review.
I want to bring in Bloomberg's Davey Alba, who was on duty this weekend. And Davey, you wrote a really important report Saturday into Sunday about how quickly misinformation spread on key social media platforms, in particular X. Just summarize your reporting for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is kind of to be expected after any major news event, that there will be information flying from all sides as the facts become clear. But the thing that we've seen over and over at this point is that people are all too willing to share conspiracy theories as well about what actually happened. I think there was an advantage in this particular moment that there were live cameras and so much documentation of what actually happened when the president was shot in the ear, the former president, I should say. Yeah. However, that didn't stop some others from spreading unfounded narratives, such as, some actual people who hold elected office who said that President Biden ordered the shooting. There were rumors flying about the identity of the shooter that were completely unconfirmed, but people were pointing fingers at specific individuals. And there were also tons of rumors about this event being staged when there is no evidence of that.
I just want to hone in on that fact, because your story really brings it to light, Davey. Ultimately, these aren't just average users of social media. These are sitting lawmakers. These are elected officials. And I want to understand how much more complex that makes the role of social media.
Yes, that's a really great question. And I think what comes into play here is that we've seen content moderation efforts over the past year get weakened. The idea that social media platforms are in a position of basically deciding what speech can remain up and what should be taken down is something that was very controversial over the past few years and really took root, I think, this year, with many Republicans sort of saying that these social media platforms are in a position of censoring speech. So I think the platforms are in a tough position right now. They have to make these calls about whether someone who actually holds elected office can continue to post essentially whatever they want, or if the speech is so false that the facts simply don't bear that out, do they do something about it? And I think that the answer in this presidential election cycle is still not clear, and these companies continue to be in a tough place.
Davey Alba, brilliant reporting. We thank you, working throughout the weekend. Look, we can now talk about someone who has deep experience of what it's like to work within one of those social media platforms and indeed has a bird's eye perspective of it now. Cara Frederick is with us from the Heritage Foundation, research and educational institution with a mission to promote conservative public policies. Cara, you served as director of the Tech Policy Center with research focusing on big tech, emerging technology policy. What's so fascinating is your prior role at Facebook as well, Facebook's Global Security Counterterrorism Analysis Program. You helped create it. You led it. Give us the sense of what ultimately the social media platforms are doing right now to respond to the weekend.
Well, it's a far cry from what I used to do starting in 2016, where we were essentially building an airplane in mid-flight. So what happens in a situation like this? I was specifically devoted to foreign Islamist terrorism. So it was a very different animal. But at the same time, what all of these teams are working together within companies are doing, they're working with their community operations teams. They're working with their engineers, usually the trust and safety engineers. They're working with their policy teams. They're working with people in global security, like the team that AI led, and they're trying to identify if the attacker was on the platform, if he has active accounts, if he was ever on the platform, if he posted anything. They're trying to potentially take down some of that information so the public can't necessarily see it, and instigate copycat attacks and whatnot. But ultimately, they are trying to identify the perpetrator in the minutes after those attacks that happen and get them off the platform. The whole MO of these teams is to make the platform hostile to these types of actors, and that's what they're going to be doing in the moments after an attack breaks on the news like this.
Kara, good morning, and thank you for coming on Bloomberg Technology. I'd like to just focus on what happened the last 48 hours, the social media discussion immediately following the attack on former President Trump, but also the sort of continued sharing of content. And one thing that I notice or I reflect on is how many people discussing the platform X and how they were pleased, basically, to be able to get information so quickly. But as Davies just pointed out in her reporting, within the stuff shared on X, much of it was misinformation. It was false. How do you balance speed of access to information to the check that you have to get it right?
It is a very, very difficult question. And my best advice, having been a counterterrorism analyst for the Department of Defense for 6 years, and then having worked in counterterrorism at the platform level at a big tech company, is to wait, to be very prudent about, number one, even identifying the attacker. We knew in the couple minutes after this, there were different pictures of who it could have potentially been floating around on social media. They were wrong. There are other pictures. They were wrong. So I think the act of prudence in this case is to wait, to try to get the full picture. And you know what's really interesting too is there is a cohort of open source analysts who are digging through a lot of these information. They're working many times on their own. They're not necessarily employed by these big tech companies. They're not even vendors or contracted out, but they're digging through a lot of the information. They're putting the pieces together. But my advice to everyone, just people that are looking at voyeurs, just wait. The full story eventually comes out. But in terms of weighting the scales in either way, I think big tech platforms have to do a much better job of showing that they're more neutral arbiters of information. Because as the Bloomberg reporter said prior to this, tech has been under a microscope because they haven't gotten so many of the calls right. Look at the Hunter Biden laptop story when Twitter was breaking the links to the DMs for that legitimate story in the 2020 campaign. So big tech has a lot of making up to do when it comes to this. They don't have the trust of the people, and I would say rightly so.
It was interesting that ahead of all of this, Meta did indeed, as it had said it would do, lift all restrictions on Trump's accounts ahead of the US election. It was understood, Kara. And I'm interested as we do try and gain trust, it's also at a time where we've got artificial intelligence and technology working against us in terms of really understanding the true nature of things. How much is that making life ever more difficult?
I think it's exacerbating it to the nth degree. I mean, you look at AI, and I'm a big fan of AI. I'm a big fan and pro-innovation when it comes to open sourcing these models and these AI tools. I think that's going to take us farther than our foreign adversary counterparts who are working on more closed models of these large language models, et cetera, et cetera. So I am a big fan of AI. I want to get that out front. But as we say in the tech community, if you build it, they will come. Bad actors are always going to co-opt technology that outpaces attempts to govern it. This technology is developing even more rapidly than I even foresaw when I was working with it in 2017 and then researching it in 2018. Now we were talking of an AI winter back then, another AI winter. And yet with the explosion of GPT-4, now called ChatGPT, I mean, it looks like these technologies, because they can tailor information, amplify information, and do all of this at machine speed and scale. That's the kicker, machine speed and scale. We are going to see a world of synthetic media where the truth is going to be harder and harder to discern. And that puts a lot of onus on the platform to get it right at the outset.
Kara, we have a question from one of our audience members, which is how much of Project 2025 will actually make it into the GOP platform? But let's answer that in the lens of technology, please.
Yeah, so we don't know what's in Trump's mind or Trump's campaign's mind, but we do know what the platform has said. The platform is pro-crypto, the platform is pro-AI development, and the platform is pro-space. So I think when it comes to what the Trump campaign and potential Trump presidency, second Trump presidency is going to do, I don't speak for them, but it looks like they're trying to paint an affirmative agenda, an affirmative vision of the things that they are for when it comes to technology, rather than the things that they are against. So I would expect a lot of pro-innovation to take place under a potential second Trump presidency.
An extraordinary voice to have join us today, Kara Frederick, Tech Policy Center Director at the Heritage Foundation, and also deep experience having worked at Facebook and indeed in counterterrorism. We thank you. Ed, what are you looking at?
Well, there are some other stories out there. Apple's a big one. The shares touching record highs. Upgrade to buy at Loop Capital. Morgan Stanley adding Apple to its top picks list on AI. And Bloomberg reporting that revenue from India surged 33% in the 12 months through March. We're going to dig into that in more detail later in the show. But the stock up 2.4%. $236 a share, a new record high. This is Bloomberg Technology. Let's keep talking about the Trump trade that's kind of intensified following the events of the last 48 hours. We spoke about DJT, but crypto-related names, not just Coinbase as a sort of exchange, but some of the miners also doing well. The idea being that Trump had been scheduled to speak at crypto events. He's seen as the more crypto-friendly of the two candidates. I'd also point out, Caro, there are other stocks in other areas moving to the upside on the same logic.
I mean, certainly it's not only crypto names that are moving today, investors reassessing assets across the board, Ed. The price in what a Trump win in November really does mean across asset classes. With us to break it all down, Bloomberg's Jess Menton, Shonali Basak, and look, we can talk crypto more broadly with Shonali, but just dig into some of the industry groups more broad that power the S&P 500 yet a 38th record.
That's right. So, of course, Ed just brought up crypto-related stocks. So if you look at the Bitwise ETF that tracks those crypto stocks, which I know Shonali is going to get more into the Bitcoin side of things, but of course that houses stocks like if you're looking at Marathon Digital, Right Platforms, Coinbase. We did see a pop in that today because if you're thinking about President Trump, who has been very pro-crypto exposure and things like that, you're seeing a pop there. But then also beyond just that, too, if you're looking at maybe more regulated type sectors with financials as well as healthcare, those are two key areas to watch as far as what that means, because usually if there's, say, a Republican potential sweep there, that would be more easy policy toward when you're looking at banks and financials. And then as well as the healthcare side of things, especially those insurers, if you're thinking about CVS obviously owns Aetna, and then obviously when you think about other insurers like that too, those are some industries keeping a close eye on. And then also when it comes to fossil fuels, but then renewable energy or solar stocks too, because those have been more prominent and gotten a support under a Democratic presidency. But if you're thinking about Sun Solar, Sunrun and stocks like that, that's something to watch too, because they could have potentially more restrictions or things going undone if there is a Republican presidency.
Well, the exception to that rule, probably Tesla, that's up almost 6% in a bit of a Trump bump. Shonali, the macro view here is that the market's trying to assess who's going to be president and by extension what policy will be to various parts of the economy and different industry groups.
Yeah, let's take a look across what that means across asset classes, because of course it is impacting the stock market and certain sectors, as Jess was saying, energy, financials, places that Trump would be expected to have a massive mark on policy. But then also you're seeing a really big move here, as we've been saying, in Bitcoin, up roughly 10% or more since Friday. It ended well below 60,000, closer to 57,000 on Friday, and now you're watching it surge past 63,000. Remember, Trump is largely seen as more of a pro-crypto candidate. Bitcoin's not alone. You see the dollar also rising as well, because you are watching this expectation that in a Trump administration, what you would have as the odds rise is, of course, that tariff policy and therefore potentially a stronger dollar. I would also, Ed, point to the curve steepener. When you think about the bond market, it's not the front end of the curve really that's moving. it's the tail end of the curve. You're seeing a bigger sell-off. Think here, taxes being looser in the future potentially. Think here this idea that you might have more of a fiscal burden on the United States. Of course, you're seeing that 30-year really sell-off. Briefly today, you've seen that 230 curve disinvert and steepen. And of course, that is that short end staying flat and that sell-off in the long end starting to be pronounced. There are a lot of factors under the surface here, but just significantly, many asset classes really moving into today.
Perfect summary from Shonali Basak and Jess Menton. We thank you. Ed, what are we looking at when it comes to M&A?
Yep, Google parent Alphabet said to eye cybersecurity startup Wiz. Going to have all the details next. This is Bloomberg Technology. Google parent Alphabet's in talks to acquire cybersecurity startup Wiz, according to a source, a deal that may be worth as much as $23 billion, which would make it the tech giant's largest acquisition to date. Bloomberg's Mark Bergen's here from London. Give me the rest of the details. This was a surprise.
It was a surprise, although if you're following Google and their cloud market over the past maybe 5 years, it's not. Their last big acquisition was Mandiant in similar space, cybersecurity slotted right under Google Cloud. Looks like they're trying to do it again. This is something where they have been this sort of perpetual third place in the market behind AWS and Microsoft. Microsoft in particular has been really pushing the envelope on cybersecurity, making that the case that's their advantage of Azure. But at the same time, Microsoft has some pretty noticeable and public flaws and mistakes around cybersecurity that Google, I think, is trying to exploit. So it is an aberration in the sense that it's the biggest deal by a long measure, and something where Google has stayed away from deals for antitrust reasons lately.
Some VCs could be making a sizable return. Andreessen, Lightspeed Ventures, Thrive Capital in the latest round, we understand, of Wiz. But is there regulatory risk here, Mark?
So for sure, and this company's started in 2020, so it's remarkable. This $23 billion would be almost twice its last valuation. So it's some pretty massive returns. I think the argument that Google's going to make, I won't speak for the FTC and the DOJ on this, but the argument that Google's going to make is we are not in any way a monopoly in the cloud market. Right? Google will say that they're in third position. That Mandiant deal, I believe, was about $5 billion. That one cleared. I don't expect Wiz will be approved on day 2. These things typically take some time if it goes through. But it's, Microsoft clearly has some issues around antitrust, so you can't rule that out. But I think Google's case is going to be, in this market, we are far from the market leader and far from a monopoly.
And as we know, the agreement hasn't been reached and talks could still end without one. But for now, interesting to talk with you, Mark Bergen. We really appreciate it. Thank you. Meanwhile, coming up, Elon Musk donates to a super PAC working to elect Donald Trump to the White House. We're going to discuss what was breaking news out on Friday afternoon. This is Bloomberg Technology.
Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. Ed Ludlow here in San Francisco.
Caroline Hyde in New York. Let's check in on these markets because it is a new record high, certainly on the S&P 500. Not so for the NASDAQ, but we do push higher because it is largely some of those magnificent 7 names that lead the benchmarks higher today. We're up more than a percentage point in large part thanks to the Apples, the Teslas, the Nvidias. Not so in Europe. Is this a reflection of the Trump trade and what this means for international companies trying to sell into the US? We're seeing the Stoxx 600 off by more than almost a percentage point at the moment. Bitcoin, though, rallies. And again, this is an extension of what it means if it is more likely to see former President Trump now enter the White House. We're seeing up more than 5% on crypto. He's seen to be a more pro-crypto candidate for the White House, and we're up the most in 2 months. Move on to some of the individual names because, of course, after that failed assassination attempt over the weekend, it seems to be boosting those bets for former President Trump to return, and that means Trump Media, his own media company, up almost 30%. Not so, of course, if you are seeing the renewables trades, green energy-focused stocks on the downside, more than 10%. We shine a light on what's happening for Sunrun today. But an interesting one on Tesla. more than 5% higher. It's got a solar business, a sizable one, Ed. It is like the name that encapsulates green policy. But it is also, of course, perhaps a Trump trade here with Elon Musk going in. Previously, we understood the reporting happening on the weekend, Ed, that indeed we saw being backed by Trump is Elon Musk. Max Chafkin is here to discuss a little bit more. But Ed, can you just dwell on the fact that almost before what occurred this weekend, an extraordinary set of circumstances in Pennsylvania, we had reporting that indeed Elon Musk was going to be supporting a super PAC?
Correct. So Musk made this public endorsement following the assassination attempt on former President Trump. But late Friday night, and you may have missed it, Bloomberg reported, citing sources, that Musk had made what we're characterizing as a sizable donation to a low-profile organization called the America PAC, which is actually due to disclose its funding today, July 15th. So depending on the timing of when Musk made that donation, we will get some more information about it. But let's bring in Bloomberg's Max Chafkin, because I find this really interesting. You know, the history of Musk's relationship with former President Trump, maybe it doesn't matter now. He's endorsed Trump publicly through the platform X.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Elon Musk in 2016 did kind of start to drift towards Trump. I mean, he was initially on a couple of these executive councils and then broke with the former president over the Paris Climate Accord. But what we've seen over the last 5 or so years is a thawing of those relations, even as they've insulted each other, you know, often publicly. There has been a cooling and definitely an ideological convergence when you look at sort of what Elon Musk is saying on his, X page and what the former president is saying on the campaign trail. There are a lot of commonalities. And on top of that, of course, Elon Musk has what I'd say is a pretty bad relationship with the Biden administration, right? You have multiple federal agencies investigating various aspects of his business. Elon Musk has had all sorts of extremely negative things to say about the current president. So you can see a lot of reasons why they would be able to find common ground. And of course, until recently, former President Trump's finances have started to look a lot better, but until recently, he really needed money. So they both kind of need each other, and I think that's what we're seeing.
When you go to the Elon Musk needing each other and needing Trump, or indeed anyone who's in the White House, remind us of the government contracts that Elon Musk basically sits atop of. Yeah, so Elon Musk is, of course, he is known as an innovator, but he's also been a very successful government contractor. Many of his businesses, much of his business depends on relationships with the government, either in terms of direct contracts with SpaceX, or Tesla, of course, depends on these tax credits and has for the entirety of its existence. So you can sort of see why he has an interest. And of course, he's got a lot more planned, right? SpaceX is hoping to go to Mars, wants to be involved with that. And if you look at the GOP platform, which we're going to see at the convention, it does bring up commercial space, Mars. It brings up AI, the fears of sort of the wokeness in AI, or it implies that, which is another pet Elon Musk issue. On the other hand, former President Trump has said very negative things about the EV industry. So there is potential tension there as well.
Max, I wrote in my Hyperdrive newsletter last week about the idea of what happens to public funding or IRA funds in the event of either White House. And no one I've spoken to would say if Trump wins the presidency, that would just go away. But I just wanted to remind our audience of the New York Times reporting from earlier this year that Trump met with oil executives and basically said, if you help fund my campaign, I will be, let's say, less supportive of EVs. So then we bring in Musk. It doesn't really add up. Trump's sort of historic attitude towards electric vehicles, and Musk and Tesla as the market incumbent, the company that paved the way for electrification.
Yeah, it's hard to know how to parse that. And of course, what candidates say on the campaign trail isn't necessarily what ends up happening. From the sort of Musk point of view, 2 points. One is that I think Trump making those comments and then those comments leaking could be read as a sort of blinking red, orange light for somebody like Elon Musk to donate. It will be interesting to see if former President Trump softens his, attitude to the EV industry. The second thing is that Tesla is the market leader. It doesn't necessarily hurt the company if if a hypothetical second Trump presidency, kind of cracks down on the EV industry or gets rid of a lot of subsidies, it might even just sort of lock in Tesla's position. Now, that's not something you want to hear if your interest is in growing the EV industry in a big way, but it's not clear that that's even Musk's goal at this point.
Max Chafkin's written so much, Caro, about the history of Musk and politics. We just showed that graphic of some of the other names over the weekend that publicly officially endorsed President Trump. And for me, this is a big story, Caro. I find it so interesting.
Notable that people are now willingly taking to social platforms, many of them, Bill Hackman, a prevalent user of Elon Musk's X as well, to make these sorts of endorsements and statements. It has to be reflected on, of course, many CEOs within technology were coming out and condemning the violence that we saw this weekend as well, and using social platforms with which to do that. But Max, just a last take on ultimately whether we see more money weighing in here and any clarity on the extent that we hear of Elon Musk support.
Silicon Valley entrepreneurs and CEOs and investors, they want to back winners. So I don't think it's totally surprising. Even before this assassination attempt, Trump had a very good couple of weeks. So I don't think it's surprising that we're seeing the corporate money flow in, because the way these guys think, right, is they want a voice in whichever they judge to be the likely winner. So I think that's part of what's going on, and it would not surprise me if we see more money from Silicon Valley. And in fact, we could see Elon Musk take a potentially active role here, either just on his X platform or with further donations. We'll see, but nothing would surprise me at this point as far as Musk and Trump coming closer together.
Max Chafkin, the perfect voice and all things Elon Inc. We appreciate it. Coming up, we're going to be talking to a CEO about a further integration in AI. Tom Siebel, founder and CEO of C3 AI, a partnership with Google Cloud. This is Bloomberg Technology. We want to talk about AI partnerships. Another one being announced. Tom Siebel of C3 AI, the CEO there, to talk us through what is your partnership with Google Cloud, the launch of new AI programs, and most notably AI for government programs, AI, generative AI, we're talking here, Tom. Can you just dig into what has driven this partnership with Google Cloud, ultimately how it enables you to serve with government and consumers that little bit more?
Google Cloud has been a great partner, and we've been working with them at massive scale in state and local government, to bring solutions there associated with property appraisal, associated with law enforcement. And now in state government and federal government, we've come up with a very unique solution utilizing generative AI to make all the complexities associated with things like the Affordable Care Act, and all of the services that come out of Health and Human Services, Medicare, Medicaid, CMS, what have you, immediately accessible to the public. We've solved all the difficult problems associated with data exfiltration, cybersecurity, hallucination. Those are gone. And now we deal with these programs that are, biblical in scale, in the complexity. And you can ask any question in 133 languages and get the answer immediately, the correct answer the first time in the language that you inquired. So it makes it so that governments can provide better services at lower cost into more satisfied constituents.
And indeed, government has been a real strength of C3 AI. What's also notable is, the fact that you're teaming with Google's cloud here. Many might say that actually Microsoft, Azure, and Amazon, AWS, Amazon more broadly, these hyperscalers might be your own competition. Did you have to do the deal for infrastructure with Google?
These are all partners. Microsoft is a great partner. AWS is a great partner. We do a ton of work in the defense and intelligence community with AWS. But let's remember, I know that people like to focus on the defense and intelligence community. It's roughly 20% of the federal budget. Most of the budget is benefits programs, Social Security, health insurance, retirement programs, and we can use generative AI to allow government to provide much higher services, quality services at lower cost. This applies not only in the United States. This applies to the National Health Service of the UK. This applies.
Have a
Kara,
slight
let me jump in
technical-
here for a second. I think that Tom may have some Zoom issues, which we forget is kind of normal in the day and age that we live in. I mean, when we get him back, and we'll work on that, Kara, I think what I want to ask him and understand is, like, is this a vote of confidence in C3 AI being a technology provider? In other words, Google Cloud are like, they're quite good. So, Mr. Siebel, I think you're back with us. Thank you for joining us on Bloomberg Technology. Say hello. Are you there?
Hi.
OK, so let me give that question to you. Is this a sales channel thing where you guys can go to a certain customer demographic? Or is this Google Cloud saying, actually, C3 AI's really got something here from a product level that we don't have?
Oh, this is a deep technology partnership. We've been working with Google Cloud very closely for years. So we have a deep technology partnership to take advantage of the important work they're doing with generative AI and Gemini and make that more accessible using the C3 AI platform, which represents, I don't know, $2 or $3 billion worth of software engineering. So this is a technology partnership that goes back some years. And yes, we are partnering technologically. Yes, we are jointly developing. And yes, we are jointly servicing and selling and servicing customers all around the world.
Mr. Siebel, one story we covered earlier in the program was reporting that Alphabet or Google are looking at Wiz in the M&A context. You've just partnered with them. It's interesting to consider the antitrust repercussions of that. But have you seen the report, and what do you make of that?
Well, I think that, one of the existential threats that we have to the world relates to cybersecurity. And I think that any one of these hyperscalers that are beefing up their cybersecurity capabilities makes the world a safer place. So I think it's a good thing.
Tom Siebel, didn't even get onto your thoughts of AI in the world of fake news. It's something that I know that you've been thinking a lot about. We look forward to having you back on the show. Tom Siebel, founder and CEO of C3 AI, on that partnership with Google. Ed, what are you looking at now?
Some of the other news stories today in Talking Tech. First up, AutoNation warns of a big hit to second quarter earnings. The US car dealership chain says profits could be lower by $1.50 a share. This after a cyber attack left the auto retail industry crippled for weeks earlier this month. AutoNation says it does not expect the attack to have a material impact on its financial conditions going forward. Plus, smartphone shipments are on the rise. That's according to IDC. Global smartphone shipments rose 6.5% in the latest quarter. Apple iPhone shipments stabilized with 45.2 million handsets shipped. The rise comes as smartphone makers, including Huawei and Xiaomi, slashed prices in China to entice consumers in the biggest mobile market. And finally, spending on Korean cultural products is forecasted to nearly double to $143 billion by 2030. That's according to new research released by TikTok and analytics company Kantar. The soaring popularity of the K-culture products saw an amplificator by social media, which has become a gathering place for K-pop fans who are online. Karen.
Staying in Asia, Panasonic CEO Yuki Kusumi spoke to Bloomberg's Sherry Ahn in Tokyo about the need for company managers to feel more of a sense of crisis given low profitability. Kusumi also discussed the outlook for Panasonic's EV battery business. Just take a listen.
In terms of a sense of crisis, we have not fulfilled our commitments and improved our earnings. As a result, the group as a whole has not achieved the level of profits that meets the expectations of investors. This has led to a slump in the stock price and has also led to the price-to-book ratio falling below 1. I would like to emphasize that all of our management team must recognize that this is a critical situation, and we must manage our businesses accordingly.
The EV battery business has been a focus for you, but that's been really affected by external demand, right? When are you expecting to see a turnaround, and do you see any positive signals coming from your strategic partner, Tesla?
When we start supplying batteries to, for example, Mazda and Subaru, our plant in Japan will be in full operation, as well as in the US. We will continue to expand our business in the US, and we will follow the demand of US automakers and invest according to the growth of that demand. So in that sense, we will make our investments in such a way that the plants will not be forced to stop operating.
What can you tell us then about, say, the US demand outlook, especially because you've been doing pretty well in your business there, but it's also because of the Inflation Reduction Act, right? And I wonder, what are your calculations of what happens after the presidential elections if the incentives are taken away?
I have heard that the IRA will not disappear immediately if Trump becomes president because of the way the US legal system works. This means that it will take a few more years. The spread of EVs is expected to slow down, not only because of the IRA, but also because the charging infrastructure is not yet sufficient. And I think there are other reasons as well. One reason is that EVs are expensive, even with the IRA. And as these issues are resolved, the spread of EVs is expected to increase in the long term. We will invest accordingly and will manage our business in such a way that the speed of EV adoption will not directly affect our business condition.
Are you expecting to see more price competition, though, in the EV battery market, especially from the likes of giants like China CATL, for example? Will you need to readjust your cost structure?
There are different types of batteries that can be used in cars that prioritize price and sacrifice some performance, and those that thoroughly pursue performance and safety. Although there is price competition, we will continue to supply equipment and vehicle makers that recognize the quality of our batteries.
That was Bloomberg's Sherry Arm speaking to Panasonic CEO Yuki Kusumi in Tokyo. Okay, coming up on the show, Apple looks to India for expansion opportunities after annual sales surged 33% in the Indian market. Some Bloomberg exclusive reporting up next. This is Bloomberg Technology. Let's zero in on Apple. The stock hit fresh record highs today after an upgrade to buy at Loop Capital on the iPhone's AI potential. Morgan Stanley's also added the iPhone maker to its top pick list, with AI also being seen as a catalyst. Caro?
Yeah, and I think we need to stick with AI, but also revenue being generated internationally. Look at India, where Bloomberg is reporting that Apple's revenue has surged 33% in the 12 months through March. According to a Bloomberg source, sales during the period were $8 billion, up from $6 billion a year ago. Let's delve into it. Anurag Rana of Bloomberg Intelligence. A lot of buoyancy around this name today, Anurag. And what do you make of the Indian sales?
Yeah, Caroline, I'm in your camp. I think the sales push from India and China are far more important, in my view, in the both in the short run and the long run than AI. But but very happy to see that. India is a very big market for Apple. I mean, the end market is over 600 million smartphones, and Apple has less than 5% market share. So over the long term, I think India is going to be a very exciting story for Apple. But it's going to take some time because currently China is 8 times bigger than India in terms of units, smartphones or iPhones. So China still is the main story at this point over the next 2 to 3 years. But I think India is very exciting for the long future of Apple.
So it might be like early days, but one interesting point of the reporting from Bloomberg was that of that $8 billion figure, more than half was iPhone sales rather than other devices or services. How do you have to play the Indian market differently, like in terms of ASPs or your patience for a growing or emerging middle class?
Yeah, so, Apple can truly gain a lot of market share in India by, let's say, lessening the price of their lower end model. But they don't really, play that game. They are all about, the margins and they don't play the market share game. So we don't see them launching a cheaper phone or anything. I think Indian market is going to be gradual. I mean, gradual, and I say when I compare to China, China's Apple market share in the Chinese market is 20%. And in India, it's less than 5%. So, over time, as the Indian consumer becomes more affluent, when purchasing power becomes, better than what it is right now, we think Apple is one area where they'll gravitate to because of the luxury nature of the product, because of the brand that's associated with, the quality it's associated with, and the prestige.
Anurag Rana, breaking down the international growth. It's a new record high for Apple today. We thank you. Meanwhile, that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Ed, it has been quite the show to be digesting.
Yeah, and it's going to be a really big week in America. You know, our colleagues will continue to broadcast from Milwaukee and RNC, and here there are so many technology stories to tell. Recap on the podcast. Many of you do listen to the podcast. Every day you find it on Apple, Spotify, iHeart, and of course on the Bloomberg platforms as well. From New York City and San Francisco, this is Bloomberg Technology.